Leave it to the freeze. A twisted spine and a crippled leg, it's a curse from the moon goddess herself. A gruff, disembodied voice snarled through the howling blizzard. The Alpha King has no use for broken things. If it doesn't freeze, the river will take it. Footsteps crunched away into the suffocating dark. Zofia Dabrowska held her breath behind the frost-rimed oak, the bitter wind biting through her woolen coat. When the forest finally fell silent, she crept forward, her lantern light falling upon a blood-stained basket. Inside, a tiny, misshapen pup whimpered, its haunting, metallic gold eyes piercing straight through her soul. The Tatra Mountains did not forgive the weak. The ancient pine forests were a brutal crucible where only the absolute apex survived. Zofia Dabrowska knew this better than anyone. As an exiled herbalist living on the jagged fringes of the Blackwood territory, she had spent her life mending the collateral damage of the wolves' savage hierarchy, but she had never intervened in their internal affairs. To cross the pack was to invite death to your doorstep. Yet, as she knelt in the knee-deep snow, the shivering mass of silver-gray fur in the wicker basket shattered every instinct of self-preservation she possessed. The pup was horrifyingly small, a fragile skeleton wrapped in a thin coat. Its left hind leg was twisted inward at a sickening, unnatural angle, and a jagged, raw scar traversed its tiny spine. It was a deformity that guaranteed an immediate death sentence in any pack. Wolves worshipped perfection, strength, and agility. A crippled pup was a dark omen, a stain on the bloodline that had to be purged before dawn. Zofia reached into the basket. The pup didn't snap or cower. Instead, it pressed its freezing wet nose into the warmth of her palm. The sheer, desperate trust in the gesture cracked Zofia's guarded heart wide open. "You poor, broken little thing," she whispered, her breath blooming into white clouds in the frigid air. She scoped the tree line. The scent of ozone and wet dog lingered. The calling cards of the Beta Patrol. They had left him here, at the edge of the human boundary, too cowardly to snap his neck themselves, letting the winter do their dirty work. Tucking the pup into her coat, pressing his shivering body against her heart, Zofia turned back toward her secluded cabin. The wind shrieked, erasing her footprints in seconds. Inside her apothecary, the air was thick with the scent of drying sage, crushed lavender, and burning oak. She laid the pup on a thick woolen blanket near the hearth. Under the warm glow of the fire, she examined his leg. It wasn't just broken. It had been crushed shortly after birth, the bones knitting together incorrectly, but it was his fur that made Zofia's breath catch in her throat. Beneath the grime and the matted blood, the fur at the nape of his neck grew in a distinct, star-like pattern, a silvery crest. She recognized that mark. Every creature in the northern realms knew that mark. It was the ancestral crest of the Alpha King. Zofia stumbled back, knocking a mortar and pestle off the table. "No," she gasped, her hands trembling. "It's impossible. Wojciech Nowakowski, the terrifying, tyrannical Alpha King of the North, had lost his mate, Queen Elżbieta, and their newborn son in a rogue ambush 3 months ago. The entire kingdom had been mourning. Wojciech had turned into a grieving, bloodthirsty phantom, slaughtering entire rogue factions in his hunt for his family's killers. The official story was that the heir was dead, his body burned in the ambush. But looking at the golden eyes staring up at her from the hearth, Zofia knew the chilling truth. The ambush wasn't rogues. It was an inside job. Someone within the king's inner circle had murdered the queen, crippled the heir to make him unviable, and dumped him to die. If Zofia kept him, she would be harboring a ghost, a target for the most dangerous traitors in the kingdom. But if she gave him back, she would be handing him to his executioners. The pup let out a soft, pathetic whine, trying to drag his twisted body toward the warmth of her boots. Zofia's jaw set in a hard, resolute line. She reached down, scooping the royal heir into her arms. "They think you are a curse," she murmured, brushing her thumb over the silver crest. "But you are going to be their reckoning. I will call you Julian, and you will survive." 7 winters passed, layering the mountains in ice and isolation. Zofia's cabin became a fortress of secrets. Julian grew, not as a wolf, but as a boy. Shifter children often remained in their human forms during their formative years to conserve energy, and for Julian, it was a saving grace. As a boy, his deformity translated into a severe limp. His left leg was shorter, braced with a complex apparatus of leather and iron that Zofia had painstakingly engineered for him. He was a quiet, fiercely intelligent child, with untamable silver-blonde hair, and eyes the color of striking lightning. "Keep your weight centered," Sophia instructed, her voice ringing out across the frost-covered clearing behind their cabin. Julian, panting heavily, stood with a heavy wooden staff in his hands. Across from him was a target made of stuffed burlap. He lunged, his braced leg dragging slightly, but he used the momentum of his pivot to strike the target with bone-crushing force. The staff cracked against the frozen burlap. "Good," Sophia praised, stepping forward to hand him a canteen of water. "They will always expect you to be slow. They will always look at the brace. You use their arrogance as your weapon." Julian wiped the sweat from his brow, his golden eyes narrowing. "Why do I have to fight like a human, Ma? Why can't I just shift?" Sophia's heart tightened. Julian had never shifted. The trauma of his infancy, combined with the physical limitations of his body, had seemingly locked his wolf away. Deep down, Sophia was grateful. If he shifted, the scent of the alpha bloodline and the silver crest on his coat would act as a beacon to every wolf within a 50-mile radius. "Your mind is your sharpest claw, Julian," she said softly, smoothing his unruly hair. "The wolves in the valley, they rely only on brute strength, but a king, a true survivor, wins the battle before the first drop of blood is spilled." Julian looked at her, his childish features hardening with a maturity that broke her heart. He knew they were hiding. He knew he was different from the human children in the village who threw stones at him, calling him a cripple, and different from the wolves who howled at the moon. One evening, the unpredictable nature of the forest shattered their quiet existence. Sophia was out collecting wintergreen when a low, guttural snarl echoed through the pines. A massive, emaciated rogue wolf, driven mad by starvation, stepped onto the path, its rabid eyes locked on her. Sophia froze, her hand dropping to the silver hunting knife at her belt. But before she could draw it, a small figure launched from the underbrush. Julian, wielding a heavy iron fireplace poker, threw himself between Sophia and the beast. He didn't roar, he didn't scream. He stood his ground, his small, braced leg planted firmly in the snow, his golden eyes blazing with an ancient, terrifying authority. The rogue lunged. Julian swung the iron poker, catching the beast across the jaw, but the wolf's momentum knocked the boy backward into the snow. The rogue mounted him, jaws snapping for Julian's throat. "Julian!" Sophia screamed, lunging forward with her knife. But then, something impossible happened. As the rogue's jaws closed in, a deafening, concussive wave of energy erupted from Julian's small body. It wasn't a physical blow, but a command of pure, unadulterated alpha aura. The air pressure dropped, the trees groaned, the rogue froze, paralyzed by a genetic instinct it couldn't control. It whimpered, tucking its tail, and scrambled backward off the boy, fleeing into the woods as if the devil himself were chasing it. Sophia dropped to her knees, pulling Julian into her chest, her whole body shaking. The boy was gasping, his eyes glowing like miniature suns. He hadn't shifted, but the wolf inside him had just woken up, and it was screaming its presence to the world. Word of a strange energy pulse in the Blackwood territory traveled fast. By the next moon, the isolated tranquility of Sophia's apothecary was shattered by the arrival of the royal guard. Sophia was grinding willow bark when the heavy oak door of her shop was kicked open. The wind howled through the entrance, carrying the suffocating scent of dominance, blood, and freezing rain. Standing in her doorway was Wojciech Nowakowski. The Alpha King was a mountain of a man, draped in a heavy black coat trimmed with wolf fur. His face was a landscape of harsh angles and old scars, his jaw clenched in a permanent state of suppressed rage. He was terrifyingly beautiful, yet unpredictable, a king known to execute his own generals for a perceived slight. Sophia's blood ran cold. She quickly threw a cloth over the iron leg brace she had been repairing on the counter. "My king," she said, dipping her head in a slow, calculated bow. "To what do I owe the honor?" Wojciech stepped into the cramped apothecary, his massive frame making the room feel microscopic. He didn't look at her immediately. His piercing, slate-gray eyes scanned the shelves of dried herbs and glass vials. "My border patrols felt a surge of alpha command 3 nights ago. Near this ridge," Wojciech's voice was a low rumble that vibrated through the floorboards. "Yet, no alpha claims this territory. Only a human herbalist. I felt nothing, Your Grace." Sophia lied flawlessly, though her pulse hammered in her throat. Perhaps a rogue passing through. Wojciech finally looked at her. His gaze was intrusive, peeling back her layers. Rogues do not possess the aura of kings. Healer. He stepped closer, towering over her. The proximity was intoxicating and terrifying. She could smell the pine needles on his skin, beneath the metallic tang of dried blood. He was a broken man, running on vengeance. You are trembling. You are a frightening man. Alpha Nowakowski, Zofia replied, her voice remarkably steady. A shadow of a dark, humorless smirk touched his lips. Good. Suddenly, he swayed, a heavy grimace crossing his features. He grabbed the edge of her wooden counter to steady himself. Zofia's healer instincts flared. She noticed the dark, purplish stain seeping through the dark fabric of his side. You're bleeding. Wolfsbane? A minor disagreement with a neighboring faction, he grunted, refusing to look weak. Sit, Zofia ordered, her motherly, commanding tone slipping out before she could stop it. Wojciech blinked, clearly taken aback. No one ordered the king. For a second, Zofia thought he might strike her, the unpredictable violence he was famous for bubbling to the surface. Instead, a flicker of genuine surprise softened his eyes, and he heavily lowered himself onto her wooden stool. As she worked, peeling back his bloodied shirt to clean the jagged wound with a stinging antiseptic, the silence between them was thick with an unspoken, electric tension. He studied her face, her gentle but firm hands. You have a mother's touch, he noted quietly. You have children? Zofia's heart stopped. In the back room, hidden beneath the floorboards, Julian was practicing total silence, as she had taught him. A son, she managed to say. He is resting. Wojciech looked away, a profound, agonizing sorrow flashing across his features. I had a son once, he whispered, the words sounding like breaking glass. He would have been 7 this winter. Zofia's breath hitched. Looking at the broken king, she felt a dangerous surge of empathy. He wasn't just a tyrant. He was a father whose heart had been ripped out. The urge to tell him the truth, to scream that his boy was in the next room, clawed at her throat. But as she tied the bandage, she caught sight of the man standing in the doorway, Beta Tomasz, the king's right hand. Tomasz's eyes were locked on Zofia, cold, calculating, and filled with suspicion. He was the one. Zofia recognized the harsh, gruff voice from the blizzard 7 years ago. If she revealed Julian now, Tomasz would ensure neither of them survived the night. The wound is clean, my king, Zofia said, stepping back, building a fortress of ice around her emotions. You should leave. The visit from the king was a catalyst. The energy in the forest changed overnight. The howling grew closer, the patrols denser, and the feeling of being hunted became a constant, suffocating weight pressing down on the cabin. For 3 agonizing days, Zofia barely slept. She packed their meager belongings into 2 leather rucksacks, hiding silver daggers inside the linings of her coats, and brewing concentrated vials of liquid wolfsbane and sleep-inducing hemlock. Every rustle of the frozen pine branches sent her heart into her throat. She knew Tomasz had recognized something in her eyes, a fleeting shadow of guilt or fear. He was biding his time, waiting for the king to march his armies elsewhere so the beta could quietly purge this lingering loose end. Ma, why are we packing? Julian asked on the 3rd afternoon, watching her hurriedly shove medical supplies into a satchel. His lightning-colored eyes were wide, betraying an uncharacteristic vulnerability. The wolves are growing restless. Julian, she lied, though her trembling hands gave her away. It's time we moved further south, into the human cities. Just for a while. But the moon waits for no one. And neither does destiny. It happened on a Tuesday, under the bloated, heavy light of a supermoon that cast the snowdrifts in an eerie silver glow. Julian collapsed near the hearth, his body seized by a violent, terrifying heat. His skin burned to the touch, and he writhed on his bed, kicking his iron brace across the floorboards. Ma, it hurts. It feels like I'm burning alive, Julian gasped, his fingers clawing at his own chest. His bones were cracking, emitting sickening, wet pops that echoed horribly in the small room. I know, baby, I know. Breathe through it, Zofia pleaded, desperately pressing cold cloths to his forehead. She watched in horror as his pupils dilated until his eyes were entirely black. He was shifting. His body, triggered by the proximity of his biological father, or perhaps pushed to its limits by the encroaching danger, could no longer contain the royal bloodline. Suddenly, a low, menacing chuckle drifted through the cracks in the walls, followed by the heavy thud of boots on the porch. Did you really think a human could outrun a wolf's nose? Healer? The front door of the cabin exploded inward in a shower of deadly splinters. Zofia spun around, drawing her silver hunting knife in one fluid motion. 4 massive figures stepped into her ruined sanctuary, shaking the snow from their cloaks. At the center, shifting smoothly into his human form, was Beta Tomasz. He held a wicked, serrated blade, a cruel, self-satisfied smile twisting his scarred lips. A human exile with a hidden, bleeding heart. Tomasz sneered, kicking an overturned chair out of his way. The king was blinded by your pretty face and his own grief. But I knew I smelled something foul in here. The stench of secrets. Get out of my house, Zofia snarled, planting her boots firmly, standing as a human shield between the lethal pack and the bedroom door where Julian lay agonizing. Tomasz laughed, a harsh, grating sound that held no warmth. We felt the aura a few nights ago, witch. I thought maybe a rogue had wandered in, but the scent in this cabin, it's old. Bring the boy out. If he's just some bastard rogue pup, we'll make it quick. If not, I'll take my time peeling him. Zofia tightened her grip on the hilt of her knife. You'll have to kill me first. Gladly, Tomasz whispered, raising his blade. Before he could take a step, a deafening, monstrous roar shook the cabin's very foundation. It wasn't the scream of a frightened boy. It was the guttural, earth-shattering howl of a prime alpha claiming his territory. The sound alone sent a shockwave of raw dominance through the room, making the 3 guards behind Tomasz whimper and instinctively drop to one knee. The heavy bedroom door didn't just open. It shattered outward into kindling. Emerging from the shadows, stepping through the splintered wood, was a wolf unlike any they had ever seen. It was massive, nearly the size of a grizzly bear, with a thick, coarse coat of midnight black that swallowed the lantern light. But it was the details that made Tomasz and his men freeze in absolute, paralyzing horror. The wolf's left hind leg was twisted inward, forcing it to stand at a slight, uneven angle. Yet, the deformity didn't make the beast look weak. It gave it the menacing, unbalanced gait of a battle-hardened nightmare. And there, blazing on the nape of its muscular neck, illuminated clearly in the moonlight filtering through the broken door, was a shimmering, silver starlight crest. Julian had shifted. He was magnificent. He was broken. He was the indisputable, undeniable son of the king. Tomasz's face completely drained of color, his cruel smile vanishing into an ashen mask of terror. The pup, he breathed, his voice trembling as the memories of the blizzard 7 years ago flooded back. It survived. Panic, raw and volatile, abruptly replaced his arrogant composure. If the king found out his son was alive and that Tomasz had ordered him killed, the beta's death would be slow and legendary. Kill it! Tomasz screamed, his voice cracking with hysteria. Kill the abomination before the king's patrol's here. The 3 guards hesitated for a fraction of a second, torn between the alpha command radiating from the Black Wolf and the direct orders of their beta. But fear of Tomasz won out, and they lunged. Zofia didn't hesitate. She grabbed a glass vial of volatile chemical powder from the counter and hurled it directly onto the roaring hearth. The resulting explosion of blinding white light and toxic, burning smoke instantly filled the room, temporarily blinding the attackers. Julian didn't cower. The deformed wolf launched himself forward with terrifying ferocity. He couldn't run gracefully, but his upper body strength was titangent-like. He caught the first guard by the throat mid-air, his massive jaws locking down with a sickening crunch that ended the wolf's life instantly. Zofia slashed wildly through the smoke with her silver knife, catching the second wolf across the eye, searing silver-burned flesh, and the beast howled. Blood spraying across Zofia's carefully organized shelves of drying herbs. The cabin dissolved into a chaotic whirlwind of tearing fur, metallic tang, and screaming violence. But they were vastly outmatched by seasoned killers. Tomasz, utilizing the chaos, shifted partially, letting his claws elongate. He ducked under Julian's sweeping paw, grabbed Zofia by her braided hair, and threw her brutally against the heavy stone fireplace. Her head cracked against the granite. Her vision swam into a dizzying blur of dark spots. She tasted heavy copper in her mouth. As she slumped to the floor, struggling to stay conscious, Tomasz stood over her, raising his serrated blade. I should have snapped his neck myself, Tomasz spat. You should have let the river take him, human. Before the blade could fall, a massive black paw slammed into Tomasz's chest with the force of a battering ram. The impact lifted the heavy beta entirely off his feet, throwing him backward through the shattered front window and out into the snowy moonlit yard. Julian stood protectively over Zofia's prone body, his chest heaving, his golden eyes blazing with a murderous protective fury. He tilted his massive head back and let out another earth-shaking howl, a desperate call that echoed up the mountain peaks, issuing a challenge to the heavens and anyone else who dared touch his mother. The violence spilled out of the cramped cabin and into the unforgiving, knee-deep snow of the yard. The freezing wind whipped around them, turning the spilled blood into dark, frozen crystals on the pristine white powder. The remaining 2 guards and a recovering Tomasz quickly surrounded Julian. The young black wolf was incredibly strong, a powerhouse of raw, unrefined alpha muscle, but his crippled leg severely hindered his mobility in the deep drifts. The guards knew how to hunt. They circled him like sharks, darting in to snap at his flanks and his twisted hind leg, forcing him to pivot clumsily. Julian was taking heavy blows. His midnight fur was slick, with his own blood, gashes opening on his shoulders and ribs. Yet he refused to yield an inch of ground, positioning his massive body as an impenetrable, living shield directly in front of the shattered cabin window where Zofia lay bleeding. Every time a guard tried to bypass him to get to the cabin, Julian would throw his entire weight forward, jaws snapping with lethal intent. Inside, Zofia groaned, fighting through the concussive fog in her brain. She dragged her broken body to the threshold of the window, her fingers desperately grasping for the loaded, heavy-duty crossbow she kept hidden under a loose floorboard. Propping herself up against the window frame, she aimed with a trembling hand and fired. The heavy, silver-tipped bolt caught one of the circling wolves squarely in the shoulder. The beast yelped, its flesh smoking as the silver poisoned its bloodstream, and it collapsed into the snow, writhing in agony. But the victory was short-lived. Tomasz had fully shifted. The beta's wolf form was a battle-scarred, ugly brown brute, reeking of carrion and unchecked ambition. He was a veteran of 100 territorial wars, and he saw the flaw in Julian's defense. Tomasz didn't aim for the throat. He lunged low, aiming directly for Julian's blind spot, the twisted, vulnerable hind leg. Julian roared in agonizing pain as Tomasz's massive jaws clamped down fiercely on his bad leg, the sickening sound of already fragile bones splintering echoing in the crisp air. The beta brutally wrenched his neck, and the sheer force dragged the young wolf down. Julian collapsed heavily into the snow, thrashing wildly, his jaws snapping at empty air as Tomasz pinned his crippled limb. "No!" Zofia screamed, a raw, primal sound tearing from her throat. She didn't think of the odds. She didn't care that she was a fragile human entering a brawl of apex predators. She only saw the jaws of a monster closing in to finish her son. Armed with nothing but her 6-inch silver dagger, Zofia threw herself out of the window and into the snowdrifts. She lunged, burying her knife to the hilt into the thick, muscular shoulder of Tomasz's wolf form. Tomasz bellowed, a sound more akin to a demon than an animal. With a violent, dismissive shake of his massive body, he threw Zofia off. She flew backward, hitting the icy trunk of a pine tree. The breath was knocked from her lungs, her knife lost in the snow. Tomasz released Julian's leg and turned his horrifying, blood-stained muzzle toward the helpless human woman. His yellow eyes promised a slow, agonizing end. Zofia couldn't move. She looked past the monster, locking eyes with Julian, trying to silently tell him she loved him as she closed her eyes, waiting for the final bite. But the end didn't come. Instead, the very earth beneath them literally shuddered. The howling wind abruptly died, sucked into a vacuum of sudden, suffocating pressure. A massive shadow blocked out the moonlight, casting the clearing into pitch blackness. A monstrous, pure black wolf, easily twice the size of Tomasz, erupted from the tree line like a freight train made of muscle and fury. He didn't howl. He didn't warn. He simply hit Tomasz with an impact that sounded like an avalanche crushing stone. Tomasz was lifted off the ground and thrown 50 feet across the clearing, his heavy body crashing through the lower branches of a pine tree before slamming into the earth with bone-shattering force. Zofia forced her eyes open. Standing in the dead center of the clearing, radiating an oppressive, apocalyptic aura of rage that made the remaining guard instantly piss himself and flee, was Wojciech. He hadn't come with his royal guard. He hadn't waited for his army. He had run for 3 days straight, alone, following the scent of his beta's treachery. Wojciech's golden slate eyes, burning with a hellish, untethered wrath, locked onto the broken form of Tomasz. The beta whined pathetically, trying to scramble backward through the snow, instantly recognizing the catastrophic, kingdom-ending error he had made. But Wojciech was not a merciful king. He was a widower who had just found his wife's killer. In a blur of terrifying motion, Wojciech crossed the clearing. Tomasz didn't even have time to bare his throat in submission before Wojciech's jaws locked around it. With one brutal, Sickening. An absolute twist. The Alpha King ripped the traitor's throat out, ending Beta Tomash's reign of treason in a spray of crimson. A heavy, ringing silence fell over the bloody snow, broken only by the ragged, wet breathing of the combatants. Wojciech slowly shifted back into his human form. The transformation was swift and brutal, bones reforming with sickening cracks. He stood naked and terrifying in the freezing cold, his heavily scarred chest heaving, completely painted in his traitor's blood. He turned slowly, his lethal gaze sweeping the carnage before falling upon the young, deformed black wolf struggling to stand in the snow. Wojciech's breath hitched audibly. He froze. His slate eyes traced the lines of the boy's body. He stared at the twisted left leg, the exact deformity rumors said his stillborn son possessed. Then, his eyes moved up, locking onto the shimmering, unmistakable silver crest on the boy's nape. The realization hit the hardened Alpha King like a physical blow. His knees buckled. He fell to his knees directly in the blood-stained snow, his massive hands reaching out blindly as his entire frame began to tremble uncontrollably. Julian, exhausted, bleeding from a dozen wounds, and favoring his freshly mangled leg, forced himself to stand. He limped forward, painfully dragging his bad leg, and positioned himself aggressively between the kneeling king and Zofia. The boy lowered his head and growled, baring his bloody teeth at his biological father, ready to die protecting the only parent he had ever known. Wojciech completely ignored the growl. Tears, hot and fast, streamed down his harsh, scarred face, cutting tracks through Tomasz's blood. "My son," Wojciech choked out, the booming voice of the tyrannical king breaking into the agonizing, fragile sob of a broken man who had just found his entire world. "By the goddess, my son." The aftermath of the battle was a profound, heavy quiet. Inside the ruined cabin, Zofia worked with shaking hands to stitch the deep laceration on Julian's shoulder. The boy was back in his human form, sitting on the edge of the table, his iron leg brace resting on the floor. Wojciech stood in the corner of the room, fully dressed in a spare coat Zofia had thrown him. The fearsome Alpha King looked utterly lost. He couldn't take his eyes off Julian. "He was born with a twisted leg," Zofia said quietly, breaking the silence. She didn't look up from her stitching. Tomasz left him to freeze, said he was a curse. Wojciech's jaw clenched so hard Zofia thought his teeth might shatter. "Tomasz killed my mate. He crippled my heir, and I trusted him." The guilt in the king's voice was a suffocating weight in the room. He stepped forward slowly, as if approaching a wild animal. Julian looked up. His golden eyes, so much like Wojciech's, were guarded, suspicious. "You are the king." "I am your father," Wojciech said, his voice raw. He dropped to one knee, putting himself at eye level with the seated boy. He reached out a trembling hand, hovering just inches from Julian's face, waiting for permission. Julian hesitated, then looked at Zofia. Zofia gave a tight, emotional nod. Julian leaned into Wojciech's hand. The king let out a jagged breath, pulling the boy into a crushing, desperate embrace. He buried his face in Julian's hair, weeping openly, the tyrant completely broken by the miracle of his lost child. Zofia stepped back, wiping a tear from her own eye. She felt a profound sense of completion, mixed with a devastating sorrow. Her job was done. The boy had his kingdom. He had his father. She was just a human herbalist. It was time for her to fade back into the shadows. She turned to pack her medical bag. "Where do you think you are going?" Wojciech's deep voice resonated, freezing her in her tracks. Zofia turned back. Wojciech was standing now, his hand resting protectively on Julian's shoulder. The king was looking at her, and the unpredictability in his eyes had shifted into something else. Something intensely possessive, fiercely loyal, and overwhelmingly warm. "He belongs in the palace, Your Grace." "With his pack," Zofia said softly. "I do not." Wojciech crossed the room in 2 long strides, stopping mere inches from her. The proximity made Zofia's pulse race. He reached up, his rough, blood-stained thumb gently wiping a streak of dirt from her cheek. "You did not just save my heir, Zofia. You raised him. You taught a crippled pup how to have the heart of a king," Wojciech murmured, his gaze dropping to her lips before meeting her eyes again. The romantic tension between them, simmering since their first meeting, suddenly flared into a roaring inferno. "He needs his mother." And Wojciech's voice dropped an octave, a low, possessive rumble. "The king needs his queen." Zofia gasped, her eyes widening. "I am human. I am not a wolf. You fought like a wolf tonight, Julian chimed in from the table, a small, genuine smile breaking across his face. Wojciech stepped closer, his chest brushing against hers. My pack will bow to the woman who saved their prince, or I will break their knees until they do. He rested his forehead against hers, the terrifying alpha showing her an absolute breathtaking vulnerability. Do not leave us. Please. Sophia looked at the broken king, and then at the boy she loved more than life itself. She took a deep breath, reaching up to lay her hand over Wojciech's heart. I won't, she whispered. The wind howled outside the ruined cabin, but for the first time in 7 years, Sofia Dubravska wasn't afraid of the cold. The pack had left a deformed pup on her doorstep to die, but from the snow, she had raised a king, and in the process, she had found her own kingdom. The legend of the crippled wolf who became a mighty king echoed through the Tatra Mountains for centuries, but the true heart of the tale always belonged to the human woman who dared to defy the frost. It is a testament to the fact that strength is not defined by perfection, but by the fierce, unyielding love that binds a family together, whether formed by blood or forged in the freezing snow. Did Zofia and Wojciech's love story give you chills? What was your favorite, most unpredictable moment in this tale of loyalty, betrayal, and a mother's fierce protection? If this story gripped your heart and kept you on the edge of your seat, please hit that like button. Share it with your fellow fantasy and romance lovers. And don't forget to subscribe for more epic, cinematic stories delivered right to your screen. Drop a comment below and tell us what you'd do if you found a royal secret on your doorstep.